Dividers. Shop-Sawn veneered panels, because we can. All right, so next up, we're gonna create the dividers that go into our case. They're just gonna be frame and panels, and we're gonna have a sliding dovetail in the top and bottom. So before we construct them, it's a good idea to go to the workpiece. This is, once again, a time to leave the plan numbers and just go with what we have here. So with a dry assembled casework like this, we can actually take our distance from here to here, and then add a 1/4 inch on each end for our sliding dovetail. That's gonna give us the height of that panel, which will actually be the length of one of our stiles. So we take that measurement, and hopefully it's close to what the plans call for, but if it's slightly off, no big deal. So we're gonna take that measurement and then add a total of a 1/2 inch to it. Now front to back, as long as you're close to the plans, just go with the plan numbers. That's actually very tightly controlled to make sure that our doors clear the dividers and don't bump into each other, right? So that's all kind of built into the numbers for you, but you can double check with measurements if you want to go with the plans. Ultimately, once you know that you have those numbers, then you can go and cut your parts. So let me show you what we got so far. All right, so here's one of the frames already cut to size. We're of course going to have to add a domino at each joint to bring those together, and we still need to cut our groove on the inside for the panel that goes in the middle. But you know, we've done this already multiple times, so I don't think we need to go into too much detail there, but it's really the same kind of 1/4 inch deep, 1/4 inch wide groove that stops before the end. It's all the same stuff we've done before, right? So what we're gonna focus on now is creating this panel. So with these panels, we're really looking at our dividers here, right? And we have to think about what the function is. So we're going to have drawers in this compartment. The drawers are going to be connected with slides, and I'm just going to use these undermount slides. The conversation will be the same if you choose to use side mount slides. Any mechanical slide that gets screwed into this partition side panel, you have to think about wood movement. So if we go with solid wood, which is what I opted for here and here, we might have a problem because we're going to drive screws through this bracket into the solid wood. If that wood expands and contracts over the seasons, you could wind up weakening those screws and we could have a failure at some point. So I think it is important for us to have panels that really don't move. So this kind of conflicts with what I've done so far. I had the option to use plywood down here. I wouldn't have done it here. I wanted really nice looking solid wood sides. But certainly on the bottom of the web frame, I absolutely could have used something like a 1/2 inch walnut plywood and had pretty much the same look to it. It would have been just fine on the inside like that, but I opted to go with solid wood. Well, now at this point, I kind of forgot about the fact that I have dividers here that will need to be completely stable, so I don't have any of that 1/2 inch ply. So when you do this, you've got some choices here too. If you used 1/2 inch ply down here, you'll probably have enough to do these panels. You'll be all set. In my case, I have a decision to make. I definitely don't want to use solid wood like I did before, just not going to work for the movement issue. So what I'm going to do is use material that I have here in the shop. We recently bought some 1/2 inch MDF for another project, and it turned out that we didn't use it for that. So I've got a couple of strips of 1/2 inch MDF that I think we can take some walnut Shop-Sawn veneer and we can make our own panels. Now they're going to be a little bit thicker than the target 1/2 inch, but that's fine. I don't really care. It's just more for the screws to bite into, not a big deal. And then I'll be able to use up some of that MDF material. Now the other thing is, this gives you guys a little bit of bonus content on seeing a Shop-Sawn veneered panel being laid up and the use of a vacuum bag to press it all nice and flat. So whether you do this technique or not, it might be something you're interested in watching. So let's just buzz through a quick tutorial on making our own Shop-Sawn veneered panel. I'll start by cutting the MDF cores to rough size. I could then take my walnut and resaw it into 1/8 inch sheets. At the drum sander, I'll take the sheets down to about 3/32 of an inch. I can then joint the edges so that we can glue the two pieces together for each final sheet. The two pieces being joined are taped together by stretching blue tape over the joint, and that puts it in tension. I then drop a long piece of tape long ways across the joint to help block the glue and keep the panels nice and even. After I flip it over, I can open up the joint and squeeze in some glue. Then when I press the panel flat, the tape helps hold the joint together. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Actually, sometimes I think it's fine to hate the player too. Once the joint is dry, we can remove the tape and sand the sheets. I can then trim the sheets to the same size as the MDF panel and prep for the glue up. Now I'll apply glue to both faces, drop the veneer on top, flip it, and then repeat for the other side. A couple pieces of tape will hold everything in place while we put the panels into the vacuum press where they'll sit overnight.
Need me jump in there?
All right, so with those partition panels in the vacuum press, we can move on to making the grooves in the frames. You certainly can use the technique we've already used here with the router, 1/4" bit, and the edge guide. Totally will work, but I want to show you a little bit of a shortcut method. Now, the shortcut results in grooves that go all the way through these pieces. So on our rail pieces, not a problem, right? If that groove goes all the way to the end, that then meets up with a style, you'll never see the fact that it goes all the way through. Perfectly fine. Where we run into tricks or problems with this trick, is that if we go all the way through on a style piece, when this is assembled, you will see that gap at the top. Now, if this is a door, let's say, and something that would swing open, that'll be problematic because when you look at the top of the door, you would see that gap. In this case, we're gonna do further joinery after this point, and the top and bottom of these partition panels will actually be buried in more material. So the fact that there's a little bit of a gap there, we're never gonna see it. So I think we can do this shortcut method. The reason I call it a shortcut is because it doesn't involve anything with setting up a router. You don't need extra supportive pieces. We're just making cuts at the table saw. And the way we're gonna do it is with a single blade. It's only an 1/8" curve. So in order to get the 1/4", we're gonna have to run one time this way, flip it, and run it a second time. That'll give us a dead centered groove. And if we're careful about it, I'm gonna keep the blade a little low for now. I'm gonna keep it a little bit inside of the dimension that I need so I can kind of slightly move things as I go and sneak up on that perfect fit. Let's start with some of the smaller ones here, and we'll use this guy as our test. That's why it's important to be conservative, because if we mess up, we could always take more away. We can't put more wood back. In the Wood Whisperer Guild, we have woodworking courses from some of the best instructors in the industry, like my buddy Philip Morley.
My name is Philip Morley, and I'm a custom furniture maker here in Wimberley, Texas. And I'm really excited about this project. So it's going to be my lounge chair. It's obviously heavily influenced, designed by mid-century modern furniture. That's kind of my aesthetic. There's a lot of small, subtle details on this piece that you really don't pick up at first, but as you live with it, you notice it. And that's the kind of things I like to do when I'm designing and building furniture. Every step that I do, I'm gonna try to offer more information than what I'm actually doing, so that if you don't have that tool, you could have the confidence to take this project on. Throughout the whole chair, there's a lot of very subtle details that we're keeping the same language all the way around. It's a lounge chair, so there's big cushions that go on this. It really kind of kicks you back. It has a bit of a madman feel to it. My hope is that even if you don't come away with doing it exactly the same as mine, that it inspires you and kind of demystifies the chair building concept and just gets you out in the shop to make your own. And that these videos are going to help you along with that.
Head to woodwhispererguild.com for more info. And when you're done making the grooves at the table saw, if you've got a router plane, this is a great time to use it. It can actually be kind of surprising that at the table saw, operations like this, you can actually end up with high points, and you want to make sure it is nice and consistent. So I set my blade to what feels like a low point where I'm really not catching on anything in most places. So anything that's sitting higher above that point is something that we can start to take away with a few passes. All right, and it's not much, but that could be just enough to sort of add up the cumulative effect over the rest of the project, just to cause you a little bit of a headache when you're trying to get your panels in place. This router plane is one of the most valuable tools as a power tool or hybrid style woodworker, one of the best tools in your toolbox. All right, so time to lay out our dominoes. Fairly simple compared to what we've been doing so far. We just want to use, on this one I'm going with the 8x40s, and I need to find my center point for each one of these joints. So now with the basic frame together, we can do the same thing we've done in the past, get these inner dimensions so we know exactly what our panel dimensions are going to be. In this case, the panel isn't really going to expand and contract, so we don't have to worry so much about side-to-side movement. That's the whole idea of the panel that we created here. So I'm going to take my inner dimension and then add a 1/2 inch, and then this inner dimension and add a 1/2 inch, and that accounts for our 1/4 inch grooves on all sides. So let's go back to our veneered panels. All right, so I usually give these at least an overnight in the bag. This glue really cures best when it has access to oxygen, but after 24 hours, you should still see that it's pretty firm. So at that point, it's not a bad idea to take them out of the vacuum press and then just let them sit on a flat surface or put some cauls and weights on them, let them sit for a day or so, depending on how much of a rush you're in to get back to these things. But we could take them both out now and start cleaning them up. So let's get this tape off of here. It's looking pretty good. So we can get this guy up against the stop, and you could use a card scraper, get rid of that glue. And there's really very little here to speak of. I mean, look how quickly that cleans up. And at this point, we could just give it a little sanding. I've got 2 parallel sides to my panels and I need to square them up. Of course, I've got glue squeeze out over here, so I need some way to get a nice clean edge on here before I cut the other side. So to get that done, you could use a sled at the table saw. I've got the larger Incra sled, but I also have this newer woodpecker's doohickey that actually works pretty well. So I thought it'd be fun just to give it a try. What makes it neat though is it's not like an average miter gauge. In fact, I wouldn't even like to call it a miter gauge. I think that's a bad name for it because it only does one angle. But what's neat about it is it stays at 90. So if all you're doing is 90-degree cuts on panels, this actually is a contender if you're in the market. But the coolest part is most miter gauges, when I pull them this far, they're going to kind of angle out and be pretty ineffective if a panel exceeds the size of the table. But what they have here is this little hold down mechanism. This is something you might even consider incorporating into any other modified version of another brand's miter gauge or sled, because this is really handy. You just push this little stopper down once you're on top of the table saw surface, and check out this magic. I could pull back and the miter gauge doesn't flop down. The work is supporting it. So as long as I get far enough here behind the blade, I can get ready for a nice, clean, square cut. Now with these panels cleaned up and cut to size, we could work on the joinery that goes around the perimeter. In the past, we just did a simple rabbet. We'll be able to use the same kind of setup here at the table saw to do it, but a rabbet just isn't going to cut it on this one, and let me show you why. Well, previously our panels were a 1/2 inch in thickness, and if you use plywood, that would still work too, because all you need to do is put a rabbet on one side, and then we'd be able to achieve a flush surface on one side and a recess on the other. Well, because I used 1/2 inch MDF as my core, and then put my shop-made veneers on this thing, we are approaching 3/4 of an inch in thickness for these partitions. Totally fine, but we have to do things a little bit differently now. We can't just do a rabbet because there's extra material here to deal with. So instead, we're gonna be putting a tongue on the ends. So the first step will be to make the rabbet cut on one side, and then we'll lower the blade a little bit so we can make the rabbet cut on the other side. So not too bad. Just keep in mind, if you did use 1/2 inch plywood for these as well, you would not have this problem. This is just a problem of my own making. All right, so let's test out our fit here. We don't need to add the dominoes to do this test. Just kind of do it with the frame parts here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now you might notice I've got a little bit of a gap here. That is just something that totally would have been preventable if we had a sample piece. If we had the sample piece, we could have known that maybe we needed to keep the shoulder of this rabbet just like a little more material there. This is something that we saw on our other panels because we were allowing for movement. The fact that we have that little gap here is actually not really doing us any favors, it's just a gap. So I think when I glue this together, I'm gonna try to do it in such a way that I push that gap toward the back and maybe toward what would be the top of this divider. If it's at the top and at the back, then that means once this thing is glued up and in position in the cabinet that you might not be able to see those gaps because they're not hurting anything, they're just unnecessary. So why look at them if we don't have to? All right, I think we are ready to get these glued up. All right, here we go. Well, not that I really need it necessarily, but I am using Type Bond Extend on this. It's a bit thinner and gives me a little bit more working time just so I can finesse this whole frame and panel structure square. I don't want to take any chances. And now here's something a little bit different. This is a panel that is not going to expand and contract, at least not enough to be an issue. So we can actually put a little bit of glue in the groove. You have to go nuts, just enough to immobilize it. And especially since we're hanging drawers, slides off of this thing, it's not a bad idea to make sure it doesn't have any chance of moving, especially since I have that little hairline gap in there that I mentioned. Good, check it for square. You don't need a whole lot of pressure here, just enough to close up the joints. Next time on The Wood Whisperer. This can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're fairly new to woodworking. And this is a piece that at this stage of the game, you can't afford to mess it up. Some glue into the mortise, and we're just gonna try to be, kind of clean. No drippies, no!